35 years of experience at every level, from K through 12 and beyond, into college. She's trained teachers in curriculum and classroom management. She's written and evaluated curricula. She's authored a number of books on education issues. She's hosted a nationally syndicated television program dealing with education in America. Dr. Luksik served as an advisor to President Reagan's Commission on the Family and worked for the U.S. Department of Education. I said it last time and I'll say it again. Please don't hold that against her. And so she's worked at the U.S. Department of Education, where her task was to review and evaluate education reform initiatives. And a warm welcome, please, for Dr. Peg Luksik. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm going to do the commercial portion of the program first. I'm about to feed you through a fire hose. And what happens is you will understand it while I'm talking, and then you'll go home and think, what did she say? I don't really remember. So I have two videos in the back. They're computer CDs. The first one is called Invalid and Unreliable, and this actually analyzes the testing of Common Core. That you're a member of PARCC, and so we talk about why and how the tests don't work. When I was in grad school, I actually was the grad assistant that ran the psychometric testing clinic in the university that I attended, so I administered tests like this, scored them, and then used them to diagnose and place children for IEPs. And these tests do not meet the standards of valid and reliable, no matter how you define it. So what I do is use the research and walk you through it. That's invalid and unreliable. The second one is called Should Our Children Be Standardized? What happens in a real classroom to real children when you attempt to mandate that every child learn the same thing to the same level on the same day in the same way? What does that do to a classroom? Should Our Children Be Standardized also includes information on the new Advanced Placement U.S. History Standards. That's the College Board has revised the U.S. History course for our college seniors. It now teaches the founding of this country without mentioning people like John Adams or Thomas Jefferson, and it teaches World War II without mentioning Dwight Eisenhower, D-Day, Adolf Hitler, or the Holocaust. So if you want to know what's happening in the new United States history standards, that's for you. They're in the back. We do ask for a donation because what I do is I circle the money around because I have to pay to make them. They all include original documents, so you don't see me, you hear my voice, but you see original, whether it's research or government documents. I'm going to talk to you tonight about a couple of issues. I want to just touch on, as Sandra said, the data mining, and perhaps you've seen the research or the news reports that right here in Massachusetts in the town of Tewksbury, was a committee of the school board, and they were talking about the costs of placing children out of district, and somehow the committee packet that included information on the children wound up getting published. And the local paper found it, and they didn't publish the names, but the paper said they could identify some of the children. Because even though their names weren't there, the school they went to, their age, all of that personal information was available. One of the mothers has actually been on Fox News. So they are collecting over 400 data points. Of greater concern, which also surfaced, was that the school was rating the parents on how cooperative they were, and giving the parents a grade of 1, 2, or 3, with 1 being very cooperative and 3 being uncooperative. So parents who fought for out-of-district placement for their special needs child found themselves rated 3, uncooperative. Now, if you don't think it's a problem that the schools are rating not just your children, but you as parents on how cooperative you are, then that shouldn't be of concern. But if you do think it's a problem, you should be paying quite a bit of attention to what kind of data is being collected and what they're doing with it. I want to back up. You've heard a lot of information on the history and some of the structure of the standards, but let's look at the pedagogy underneath, because you know, these are classrooms, and they are children. So what happens to children in classrooms? This is not, we're writing standards guidelines. This is basically what we want the teachers to be teaching in 3rd grade or 4th grade or 5th grade or 10th grade or 12th grade or in English or math or science. This is saying every child, they're called achievement standards. The government is mandating what your children will learn and when they will learn it. This isn't universal access to education. This is universal proficiency. Well, can we mandate that everybody learn the same thing at the same time? Well, let's move it to healthcare. A healthcare achievement standard. You all have to have the same blood pressure. Can the government mandate that? Well, they could try. Is that going to make it true? No, it's not. It's not going to make it true. So what happened? Well, the government told the states, you have to have achievement standards and every child has to be proficient, but you can define proficient wherever you want. This is what happened. Stand up. Wiggle your little tushies while you're up there. Exercise is good for you. Okay, this is vocal performance. When you can meet the standard, you can sit down, but you cannot sit down until you meet the standard. Are you ready? Pavarotti. Anybody who can sing like Luciano Pavarotti, considered one of the greatest tenors of the 20th century, can sit down. So, congratulations. Soloist with the New York Met. Chorus member with the New York Met. Soloist with the Regional Symphony. Chorus member with the Regional Symphony. Soloist with the church choir. This is a very unmusical group. Sings in the church choir. Sings in the shower and enjoys it. Can't carry a tune in a bucket. Can't find the bucket. Well, I got one right here. Okay. I am a teacher in a classroom. My evaluation and my continued employment, therefore, is dependent upon every child reaching the standard. And the states are being told that every child has to reach the standard as part of their ESEA waiver and all their federal requirements. But you can set the standard wherever you want. Where are you going to put it? Well, it sings in the shower and enjoys it, because that's where you all sat down. What about the child for whom the standard should have been Pavarotti? See, that child walked into the classroom on the very first day already able to sing in the shower and enjoy it. So that child will pass the test. The teacher gets no reward whatsoever for any child taking one step beyond the minimum standard. So the teacher looks at Mr. Pavarotti to be and says, you can sing in the shower and enjoys it. I'm ignoring you because you can already pass the test. And we don't even measure beyond that minimum standard. Did education succeed for that child, or did it fail? It failed. But it's a silent failure because that child will never be identified and will never be found and will have passed the test. And in fact, that's what the research says. The University of Connecticut did a study and said, in this system, gifted children are so frustrated because there's a ceiling on what's presented to them, because the classroom moves at the speed of the bottom. I'm the teacher. Where am I going to spend all my time in my little vocal performance class? With Mr. and Mrs. Can't Carry a Tune in a Bucket over there. What about Mr. Can't Find the Bucket? Well, I'm going to ignore him too, because I know I can't get to 100%. So I'm going to cut my losses and ignore the ones that will never make it. And in fact, that's what the research shows too. That the teacher focuses on the children immediately above that standard and immediately below that standard, and ignores the kids at the top and ignores the kids at the bottom. Which is why in all the years of standards-based education that has been mandated by the federal government since the 1990s, achievement gaps haven't changed at all. The kids at the bottom are still the kids at the bottom. When you talk about this system, it changes the goal of education from enlightening a child to reaching a standard. And as long as we reach the standard, it's good enough. Now, you heard about A Nation at Risk. You know, I was actually there because I was part of the Reagan administration, and so I was actually there. Part of what A Nation at Risk said was that this whole minimum competency movement is a mistake because the minimum will become the maximum and education for everybody will go down. Sadly, that's true. By 2008, it was reported, after 20 years almost of this standards-based movement, nearly 60% of our kids needed remediation when they went to college because it didn't work. You can't mandate achievement. If we use our medical model and we say to all the doctors of the country, okay, everybody, all your patients have to have the same blood pressure, because if they don't, you'll lose your medical license. But you can set the blood pressure wherever you want. Where are they going to put it? At 340 over 280. because then everybody will meet it and they won't lose their license. And that's what we see happening here. Standards didn't go up. The response was, we're going to grab control of the standards and centralize them. And you hear about how the standards are rigorous. And then you hear, and if you're a parent of a little one, well, they're too hard. I was in New York the other night, and one of the folks in the audience said to me, but aren't these rigorous? They're too hard. No, they're not too hard. They're not raising the content of what we're asking our children to do. They are unnecessarily complicated. From the child's point of view, that's too hard. They're still doing 2 + 2 is 4. But see, when you teach anything, the first thing that you do when you teach especially little ones is you say to them, here is the simplest way to do it. It is the most direct way to get there, and it is the one that is most designed to give you success most of the time. That's why we teach the standard algorithm. The standard algorithm, you write the problem down and solve it, the way you probably all do. Instead, we're handing our kids 17 + 15 and telling them add from the left. Now, I will tell you, I've taught math up to and including calculus. I actually do add from the left quite often. And if you talk to engineers or people who've done higher level math, they add from the left too. Because I can look at that and pull out all the 10s, it just simplifies the whole process. Then I'm left with the 1s. Easier, easier, easier. But I'm not 7. They are 7. They're not capable of abstract thought. The reason that we taught it, do it this way with a standard algorithm, was that it was very concrete. We could give them, here's how you do it. I get such a chuckle out of people who say, but nobody ever taught them why. That's the most ridiculous sentence I've ever heard. I'm an old, and I use that term advisedly, teacher. We always taught them why. Why do you think you called it carry the one? Do you remember it had those little blocks? And then you had the little stick? And you picked up the little blocks and you put them on the stick, and when you had enough blocks that it filled the stick, what did you do? You picked up the stick and you carried it to the other side. You carried the one. We actually did teach them why. But we taught them how. Unfortunately, what's happening in this system is nobody teaches them how. We don't give them one way and say, this is the simplest, most direct way to add 17 and 15. Start on the right, 7 and 5 is 12, put down 2, carry the 1, blah, blah, 3. We don't do that. So they don't master any of the ways. They circle around in confusion because they partially learned 7 different ways to do it, some of them about as insane as you can think. They never learn any. And what happens? Not only do they get frustrated, they think they're stupid. That is why our little ones are having the response that they're having. Because not only can they not do what we're telling them, but little ones cannot evaluate a grown-up. You know, to little people, there's God and then there's grown-ups. Like you're kind of right there, maybe a quarter of a step down. So if a grown-up says, this is what I want you to do, and they can't do it, they're also not capable of saying the grown-up was the idiot in this picture. They say, I'm stupid. But once you've taught a 5-year-old that they're stupid, they never lose that. They never lose that. This system destroys the children within it because it asks them to do things they cannot do. In English and language arts, they started by saying, well, this is what it would take to be college ready, which is a meaningless term, and then reverse engineered it down to 5-year-olds and said, okay, so now we want you to have this writing and we want you to share it with your peers and have constructive criticism. Have you ever met a 5-year-old? They don't do constructive criticism. They're 5. It's like we take these abstract concepts And then we hand them to a concrete thinker. They're physically not able to think abstractly. Their prefrontal cortex isn't finished yet. They really can't do it. I have 6 kids. They're all girls except for 5 of them. It's an IQ joke. Which means I have lived with teenage boys for more years than I would like to count. And teenage boys really aren't the same species as the rest of us. And they can't help it. Because physically, their hormones in their brains don't match. So if you ask them to think like an adult, they just really can't. That's why sports are so good for boys, because, it bleeds all that off. But see, 7-year-olds are the same. They can't either. So these standards hurt our kids. They lower the academic level, and then they hurt the children within them. Because instead of doing what we know works pedagogically, we try to force them to be mini grown-ups, and they're not. And then we blame them when they can't do it. So because the standards are inappropriately placed, the little ones are being evaluated, and then parents are being told, well, little Johnny's behind. No, little Johnny's not behind. Little Johnny's right where little Johnny needs to be. It's the standards that are wrong. And it's our children who will suffer. And the smaller the child, the greater the suffering. It's funny, I was in another state. I travel a lot. And I was in another state, and I was giving sort of this presentation, and a lady in the back stood up, interrupted me, and stood up and said, yeah, my child is pulling out her eyelashes. I wanted to sob. I've heard from people who their 7-year-olds are wetting the bed again. I heard from a mom of a teenager who her daughter was suicidal because she had been a high achiever and now can't figure out why she can't do it. And the mother was crying, saying, we're lucky to have her, that we found out. These things hurt kids, which moves us to the next piece, which is the testing. So you've moved into the PARCC testing, and you've heard that this test is valid and reliable. What a crock. So valid. What does valid means? A valid test tests the thing it says it's going to test and nothing else. One of my sisters is a nurse, and she actually worked for one of the big pharmaceutical companies. And so when they test a new drug, they bring volunteers in. You get the greatest physical you ever had in your whole life, because they want to make sure that everybody in the test is basically of the same physiology and the same condition of health before they start the new treatment. You have to come 3 to 7 days before, so they're sure you didn't walk in, that you had like 10 beers last night. You all have the same rest, you all have the same diet. So the only thing that will change is the effect of the drugs, and you have to live there. Now let's move that to these tests, which are high-stakes tests. They're used to determine placement, whether your child goes into remediation, whether how a teacher is evaluated. In some places, it's all of the evaluation. In some places, we're told, well, it's a part of their evaluation, but if you don't pass the test, you can't get a positive evaluation, which means it's all of it. How do you control what the child brings into the testing situation? Maybe they're sick, but nobody knows it yet. Maybe their dog died last night. Maybe their parents are in the middle of a divorce. Or there was an ambulance up the street, a disturbance in the neighborhood. Maybe they didn't have breakfast that morning or dinner the night before. In any big testing population, like a state, about 10% of the children will have one of those factors. In other words, what you really were testing was that their dog died last night and not how well they could do math. However, as the socioeconomic level of the child goes down, the likelihood of there being an interfering factor goes up. Because children who live in poverty are more likely to have an undiagnosed illness, or not have had breakfast, or have had upheaval in their home the night before, or not have had good nutrition, or something happened in their neighborhood. In one of the poorest districts in New York, a teacher stood up and told us about a little girl in her class whose mother had been shot in a drive-by shooting on the front porch of her home. And you wanted that little girl to take a test that was going to be used to determine that child's placement and that teacher's evaluation. These tests are at best meaningless, and at worst, discriminatory. Because children of poverty won't do as well. This isn't about teaching. This is about sorting children. Because from the beginning, if they can't make that grade on that one assessment, we put them in remediation and we retard their educational progress. We slow it down based on an assessment that may or may not have been valid. Now let's look at the scoring. In the PARCC tests, it's really kind of funny. PARCC has a model curriculum. In the PARCC model curriculum, you don't have to know how to do the standard algorithm, write the problem down and solve it, for addition and subtraction until you're in 4th grade. You don't have to be able to do long division until you're in 6th grade. But starting in 6th grade, you can use a calculator when you take the math test. So you don't have to ever learn to do it at all. And in the English test, you can use a spell checker. So the computer will spell for you. In the math, there's a section that's called constructed response. In constructed response, you solve the problem, and then you have to write an explanation about why you solved it. And the explanation counts for about 25% of your grade. That makes it not a math test. That makes it a writing test. So what happens? Well, if you ask a little girl to tell you why she did something, she'll begin by telling you what she had for breakfast that morning and why she has a bow in her hair, and she'll have little hearts over the thing. If you ask a boy, especially a boy who's really good in math, why did you do the math the way you did it? He will write, because that's the way it works. And what he won't write but will be thinking is, you dummy. So boys don't fare as well in these kinds of activities. Who else doesn't fare as well? English language learners. Children for whom English is a second language, who may actually have understood all the math and done it all correctly. But if they don't write about it completely enough, they can get a lower score than a child who didn't do all the math well, but it was a math test. Learning disabled kids. Learning disabilities is a weird thing. You can be universally LD, or, more often, you are either numerically affected or you are linguistically affected. So kids who have reading issues will often do well in math. Kids who have math issues will often do well in reading. Which means if I have an LD kid who's really doing well in math but has linguistic problems, they're not going to be able to write about why they did the math the way they did it. They're going to get a lower math grade and be put in math remediation for something that had nothing to do with math. And who else? Kids from lower socioeconomic statuses who don't hear standard English in their home, but may certainly be able to do the math. And how are those things scored? Well, see, they write them down, and then they bring in folks who read them. So I come from Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, our company is called Data Recognition Corporation, and they recently advertised on the web for seasonal workers. These are people who get 2 weeks of training, and then they score the tests. So it's a subjective scoring. Did you ever watch the Olympics? You know in the figure skating in the Olympics? 9 judges, all of whom are recognized experts in their field, watch the same figure skater do the same performance at the same time and give it 9 different scores. But your children are being evaluated by 1, and in some states, possibly 2, anonymous people who may or may not have any background in education at all. You don't know who they are. It's totally subjective. You don't know if they've interpreted that guideline as stringently as they can, or if they're loosey-goosey. It's good enough. And I can tell you from someone who's graded hundreds and hundreds and probably thousands of papers, I grade differently at the end of the day than I do at the beginning of the day. And if I had a glass of wine, it's even better if you're at the end of the day. So you don't know if the person grading your paper, your kid's paper, was at the beginning or the end. You don't know if they've had a good day or they're frustrated. And yet, your child's academic future and some teacher's professional career is based upon this kind of subjective, unprofessional rating system, which by definition is not valid and not reliable. Which brings us to the final problem. Not the final, but the last one I'm going to talk about tonight. In this system, your state Department of Education adopted the Common Core standards, so they're controlling the standards. They control the curriculum. They control the test. They score the test, and then they report on their own results. If you were a bank, would you give a business a loan based on that kind of information? It's an internal audit. And all you get is a piece of paper that says, little Johnny is proficient. What does that tell you? It doesn't tell you anything. It doesn't tell you anything at all. What you hear often is, well, it's just implementation problems with Common Core. No, it's not. It's broken. You know, I can put a square wheel on a bicycle, and I can tinker with that bicycle all I want, but it's not going to go because the wheel is square. Common Core is a square wheel on our educational system. You're being asked to pay for it with your pocketbooks, and our children are being asked to pay for it with their futures. There really isn't any ethical thing that any of us can do but oppose it as loudly and as strongly as we can. Thank you very much.